Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilman wa 'amalan ya Rabbal Alameen, amma ba'd. So for the past about 12 weeks or so, we've been going through this book right here. It's called When Hearing Becomes Listening. It's written by Shaykh Mikhail Smith. And it's really about prophetic listening. How our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he would listen to people, and how that was a means of transforming the people around him. How if we were to also learn to become better listeners, that would transform our relationships, and that would transform our ability to connect with the people around us, communicate with them, and influence them if that's what we want to do. So we've been going through this, and we've reached a section now where the author speaks about noise. We talked a little bit about this last week, if you were able to join us. The concept of noise. The author introduced a model that's really used for telephones, right? So you have someone trying to send a message, there's someone receiving the message, and along the way there's noise. And in the past, because of distance, there would be static, there would be different, sounds heard that could kind of distort the message, that would render the message unclear. So then the author applied that to our human communication with one another that's not on the phone, when we're just talking to somebody. And he was talking about how I might say something, and you might hear the words, but something can be lost in the process. And what would cause something to be lost would be noise. And of course the question arises, well, what noise are we talking about here? Besides the obvious, in a room where it's really noisy and you don't hear the words, like that's an obvious understanding of the word noise. But he's really talking more about noise from within the human being. So we're going to explore that, inshallah. He mentions that, look, we have two main processes of the mind when we're speaking about communication. Number one, using our mind, we understand and internalize what we're experiencing. We kind of make sense of what's happening. So that's our initial perception. And then we need to translate that perception into language and communicate it. And so an example would be someone comes up to you and gives you a glass with some liquid in it that's of a strange color. So you kind of take that whole thing in. Number one, you're probably asking yourself, wait, is this an environment where people do that? Do you know what I mean? Like if you're just in the middle of the mall and someone did that to you, it'd be very strange. But if you're in a restaurant and someone did that to you, it'd make a little bit more sense. Maybe they're just giving out free drinks or something, right? Like they're just handing out, extra soda they have left. But in the middle of the mall, you kind of be like, wait, what's happening? You try to process what's going on. And then you might communicate something based on what happened. So the two steps, right? You perceive, and then you have to translate that perception into language in your mind, and then communicate that. And so when we factor that in, the author writes, Shannon's model was not designed to explain human interpersonal communication. So it failed to account for inner noise. Right? The telephone model does not factor in, that model does not fully and perfectly apply to human conversations. Because in our conversations, noise is not only externally in the room, noise can exist from within each one of us. So he says, noise for Shannon referred to all sounds that could corrupt or distort a message coming from some external place. But from the Quranic perspective, we're taught that the difficulty with communication actually stems from the noise within. When we talk to one another, or when we're receiving a message, noise can arise from within us. So in the Quran, Allah says, وَإِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِ آيَاتُنَا وَلَّا مُسْتَكْبِرًا كَأَن لَّمْ يَسْمَعَهَا كَأَنَّ فِي أُذُنَيْهِ وَقْرًا. That whenever our revelations are recited to them, this is talking about people who reject the message of God. Whenever our revelations are recited to them, the Quran says, some of them, some people, وَلَّا مُسْتَكْبِرًا, they turn away in arrogance, as if they didn't even hear the words, as if there was something blocking their hearing in their ears. The commentators on this verse, they mention, these people could actually hear the words. They just weren't able to benefit from the message. They just weren't able to benefit from what was being said. And the verse mentions the reason. Why did they turn away? In arrogance. How many of us have done that before with our parents? They would tell us to do something or try to correct us, and we would turn away. Why? We knew they were right. Let's be honest. We knew what they were saying was absolutely right. We turned away in arrogance because we didn't want them to tell us what to do. We didn't want them to be telling us why we're wrong and how we're wrong. Do you get that? So, when we start to realize that there could be a lot of noise coming from within, we have to begin to ask ourselves, what noise do we have within ourselves that could serve as an obstacle to listening, benefiting from those around us? No, this is a serious question. Like, if you struggle talking to people or getting close to people, when you're not being as honest and nuanced, you'll blame everybody else. Yeah, nowadays, there's just no good people in the world. You know what I mean? Like, everybody else is the problem. But as you become more honest with yourself and more self-aware and self-reflective, you start to realize, maybe it's not everybody else. Maybe I'm a little bit judgmental. Maybe I'm a little bit insecure about certain things. So when someone says something and I'm always getting offended about it, maybe it's because I'm insecure about that thing. So I'm projecting a certain meaning onto what they're saying. Do you get that? That's the noise. These are the questions we all have to ask ourselves. Because it's happening all the time. Every time you're scrolling on Instagram or on like TikTok and a video pops up, do you listen to the message? And you might say, well, of course, the sound's coming through, I'm hearing it. No, but like, with what attitude? Are you open to are you listening like, let me hear what they have to say? Or are you listening with, okay, let's hear what these guys say now? And there's a big difference. You're listening to both, but your preconceived notion, your assumption about the person is going to influence how you interpret it. Does that make sense? And that's what we do, is we have a certain filter, a bias, an insecurity that taints the message coming to us. And if we're not aware of the filter, of the bias, we're going to actually pin the flaw on the other person. Yeah, that makes no sense. Can you imagine someone pulls up to like a PhD level like physics class, knows nothing about physics, sits down, and the talk makes no sense, and they're like, because, it's PhD level physics, and the dude walks away going like, man, that made no sense, man. These dudes, they have no idea what they're talking about. What would we all tell him? We're like, actually, buddy, the problem's you. You just don't have the requisite background to understand what's being said. It's a you problem. And very often in our communication when things go wrong, it's an us problem. That's the noise. That's what he's trying to highlight here. Okay, so in order to encode a message for another person, there must exist between the two people a shared field of experience. This is so profound. This point right here, and the next slide as well. This is so profound. I'm just going to read it first. In order to encode a message for another person, there must exist between the two people a shared field of experience. The more in common the two parties have, the easier communication will be. The encoding process, right, which is what? Taking the internal, subjectively experienced world and constructing a message based on the internal, subjective understanding of another person is a miraculous process. It's truly a gift of God, of Allah to humanity, and perhaps His greatest blessing upon us after faith and Iman in Him. Let's think about this for a sec. We do this sometimes so effortlessly that we don't realize it's happening. But it's incredible. I'll give you an example. Let's say your mother was away traveling to somewhere for about 3-4 weeks, came back. And you went to the airport, picked them up, and you came home, and you were just, obviously, let's assume you were really, really happy, you were elated, like, man, after 3-4 weeks, finally got to see my mom, and caught up, spent like 1 hour, 2 hours, and you're just in a great mood. And now you come out, and you're meeting up with some friends that evening, and you're hanging out, and you show up super happy. And they're all looking at you like, what happened? Like, you seem really happy. And as you're looking at your friends, your eyes fall upon that one friend whose mother passed away 3 months ago. What do you do? What do you do?
Dial down your excitement.
Okay, you might dial down your excitement. What else might you do?
Make the statement more general, like, oh, I saw someone I really liked. Or...
Yeah, you might make the statement more general. You might not even mention it. You might just mention something else that you're excited about. That, yeah, it's just been a really good day so far. Things have just been really going well for me today. Do you see how you do that? You experienced something, which was just something really happy for you. You experienced it. So now you have a certain, feeling about the world. And you have the words that you want to say. The words you want to say in your head are, hey, my mom came back. Remember, after I was telling you, after 4 weeks she came back. Those words are ready. But you see somebody, and you're able to, in a moment, understand how they might receive it. And so accordingly you say, what? Maybe I'm going to dial it back. You tailor your message. But you can only do that when? Y'all ever had that happen? Where you shared something that was really good for you, turned out someone else did not have it like that, and you felt terrible? Because you were like, let's say you didn't know, let's say one of your friends were there, and you didn't know something about their relationship with their mom or something, right? And so you said, you just shared it. You see that? You just shared it. Like, yo, oh, it's amazing. I just came back from the airport. Look what my mom brought me. You're like mad hyped. And you see someone's face go from a smile because of seeing you to suddenly the smile fades. And then you start to realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. What was missing there? All you did was take what happened, formulate words, and share the words. What was the mistake? Was you didn't realize how it would be received. Why didn't you know? Why didn't you realize how it was going to be received? Because there was no common shared field of experience there. You didn't know how or what these friends had been through and what their relationship with their mothers were like. Do you get that? And as a result, it sounds almost tone deaf. You just say something without realizing its impact. But we do this. When we know stuff about people, we can in one instance almost tailor our words, tailor what we say, what we leave out. Y'all ever done that before? So you tailored it, and then half an hour later when that person was gone, you're like, hey, I didn't tell you earlier because so-and-so was there, and you share the other news. We do it. This is incredible, the human's ability to do that. SubhanAllah. It's the ability to mentalize, which is to really take someone else's perspective and in the moment, on the fly, to do that. It's a gift from Allah, truly. Right? So you do it better the more you know about people. Isn't it? And so that's what he's trying to say is, the more in common two people have, the easier it is to communicate. That's why it's so important to try to begin to understand someone's sensitivities. What's important to them? Like, what offends them? What are those things that just are totally off limits? What are the boundaries? Right? What are the touchy topics? And the more you know about others, the more you can tailor your speech in a way that actually conveys the given message. So often we feel misunderstood or we feel dismissed, not because the other person intentionally was trying to hurt us, because it just didn't factor in our experience. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I can't believe she said that. How could she just, in such an insensitive way, talk about her mom? Knowing that my mother and me, we have a really terrible relationship, and we haven't talked in 6 years. But the possibility is what? That this person just doesn't know that. Do you get what I'm saying? And subhanAllah, that's another thing to think about. Sometimes we're just listening to something, and it's not what they said that upset us, but it's what sensitive topic that was triggered within us. Do you get it? So you're listening to a talk, and the talk has nothing to do, let me give you an example. Here, some of you potentially could walk away from this talk feeling a little bit upset. Why? Was the topic in general super, super sensitive? No. But maybe because of a little hint towards mothers and estrangement with mothers, it could leave you feeling a certain way. And if you're not aware of that, you might walk away and go, that was a terrible talk. Why? How do you know it's a terrible talk? Well, because I'm feeling really bad after I listened to that talk. Do you see that? Like, you have to be clear about what it is. So making sense of your own sensitivities and other people's sensitivities is super, super important. So the ability to understand. Now, someone might say, wait, isn't that kind of like two-faced? You're not being authentic. How many of y'all have heard that? Like, we need to be authentic. Speak your truth, yo. That doesn't mean to be completely insensitive. That's not what it means. Not at all. Especially Islamically, that's not an Islamic practice. That's not what our Prophet taught us. The ability to understand and interact with people based on their subjective perceptions is a prophetically endorsed skill, as it completely aligns with the statement of some of the companions of the Prophet, who used to say, speak to people according to their level of understanding. Don't talk to people in a way that would confuse them. Do you get that? Like, here's an example. Imagine someone's like, no, I'm going to be me wherever I go. And let's say they have a PhD, right? Let's say they're just like really, really intelligent. And they meet their family friend's grandson. And they're like, I'm not about to tailor my speech for no little kids. I'm going to be me. And they're speaking in like full PhD level, terminology, language. We look at them and be like, you've lost the plot. Like, you're so disconnected from... No, tailor your speech. Speak to that child in a way that the child would understand and appreciate and connect with that child. And that's not, I'm not being authentic. No. Right? And so the same applies to however you speak to people, being aware of like what their sensitivities are and factoring that in. It's important. It doesn't mean you twist the truth. Let's be clear about that. It doesn't mean you twist the truth. But the goal is not just to say it. Some of us, we have this, in our culture sometimes, this idea of, I told them, Like, I said it to their face. Was that the goal? The goal was just to, like, get it off your chest and say it to their face? No. The goal should have been to help them understand what they did wrong. The goal should have been to communicate to them your pain or whatever you're upset about. The goal should have been something constructive. Not just, I just told them, yo. Now it's their problem. Do you understand that? The same applies to religious discourse as well. A lot of us, that's what we've struggled with. Is growing up, religious discourse that was not tailored to our understandings. And so it just came down hard on us. Like, shame on you, how could you ever do that? You're a terrible Muslim. And you're like, whoa. And it was not tailored to the way that you think about life. And so that's back to this point. The Prophet ﷺ would speak to people according to their level of understanding. In another explicit prophetic narration, he teaches, treat people according to their level. That is questionable in terms of its attribution to the Prophet ﷺ. It has come from some of the companions. Okay. Now, when a society focuses on speaking more than listening, we begin to mistake a warring monologue for genuine dialogue. Dialogue is transactional. This means that the parties involved, they shift from giver to receiver throughout the conversation. Warring monologue is the only way to describe much of the discourse that takes place on social media. This is a really important point here. You know when you talk to somebody, one of the first things you have to discern is, are they looking for a conversation or are they looking for an argument? I'm serious. Sometimes you'll meet somebody and they'll come up to you and they'll ask you a question. And you think, well, let me explain. Well, first, you need to figure out, why are they asking? Like, are they open to hearing your answer? Otherwise, you're going to waste your time. You're going to try to explain, they're going to shoot you down, you're going to try to say something else, they're going to twist your words, they're going to ignore it. Should I give you like a really literal example? Y'all ever watch Piers Morgan? It's a classic example of someone who's not listening to understand. He has his framework. He has his talking points. Right? He has to please Rupert Murdoch. He has to say certain things. He's not allowed to criticize certain things. He has to come from a certain angle. So no matter how many people will pin him in a corner on a point, he can't go elsewhere. Which it becomes very frustrating. I can only imagine how frustrating it becomes for the person sitting across from him. But like when you're watching, sometimes it's frustrating. You're like, bro, just answer the question. Stop deflecting and pivoting, right? But the core of it is that he's not asking to truly understand. Do you get that? And so it's monologues back and forth. It's monologues back and forth. And that's something to think about. In our conversations, are we having a dialogue, like duo, two people, making an effort to understand the other person? That's why one of the most valuable questions you can ask is, hey, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Sometimes it gets frustrating if someone keeps asking you that, because you're like, oh my God, I have to keep explaining it. But actually, it's a sign that they're being very careful. They don't want to misunderstand you and impose their own interpretation on you. They're making an effort. They're making an effort to try to understand. That's something to really appreciate and value when someone says, wait, I think I know what you mean, but can you explain that a little bit more so I'm just confident that I got the right meaning? To recognize that's a virtue, right? So that's a dialogue. Social media, mashallah. That's all I can say, man. There's not much I can say about that. Comment sections? Oh my. I can't remember the last time I ever commented in the comment section, like for a conversation. How my reasoning is that I just genuinely don't see healthy dialogue there. How many of y'all have engaged at some point in healthy dialogue in a comment section? Anybody? It might have happened, but How many of y'all have engaged in some very strange conversations in comment sections? After I said that I don't do it, everyone was like, no, we don't do it either. Right? Or like, how are you going to... You didn't create a safe space for us to admit that. You set it up in a way that like anyone who does it's crazy. No, that's not what I meant. Right? Because when I look through, I'm like, oh, this is wild. This is, you know what I mean? Like you can tell who's really trying to understand something and who's just going off. So, yeah, it's not a discourse, that's for sure. Now, the frames of reference of two people can become so distant from each other that mutual understanding is impossible. This is considered a major type of noise that complicates communication, right? Or people can become so close to one another that their frames of reference are almost identical. For such people, even the slightest gesture communicates so much. It's so interesting, right? Because you could be so deeply misunderstood by somebody that it shocks you. How did you take that message? It's because your frames of reference are so different. Do you know what I'm saying? Have y'all ever used a word in the wrong way without realizing it means something different to someone else? And they were like either offended or like amused? And you were confused because you're like, that's not how I use the word. Can I give you an example? It's because I need to reestablish that safe space here, guys. So should I give you an example? Recently they called me a yapper. They're like, you're a yapper. And they weren't like, hey, you yapper. They're like, you're a yapper. And I was really I won't lie to you, I was kind of offended. Right? I was like, really? But then I thought about it. I was like, I don't think that's what they mean. Right? I don't think that's how they intended that. So I asked them, I was like, is yapper a good thing or a bad thing? Like to you? They're like, oh, it's normal. It's like someone who talks a lot. They're like, I'm a yapper too. That's what they said. And I was like, okay. That's why they felt comfortable calling me a yapper. Because they were like, well, I'm a yapper, so you're a yapper. It's all good. We talk. And I was like, wow. Because from my frame of reference, yapping was not a good thing. So that's where I had to bridge the frames of reference there. And be like, oh, in my world, that's not a good thing. But in their world, it is. So then when you can bridge the frames of reference, you can avoid a conflict. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, if I didn't do that, I would have been offended. I would have been like, excuse me? How dare you call me a yapper? Like, what? Do you know what I'm saying? Frames of reference. Like cultural sensitivities. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, that's what he's talking about. And when people are so close and they have the exact same almost frames of reference, it's incredible. Just one glance tells everything. Someone says something, you just look at them, and the two of you get it. Like, oh, we're about to have a real conversation after this, man. This is going to be a juicy one to dissect after. And all you communicated was just a little look. That's it. Frames of reference. We do that when we get close to people, right? The more we can understand each other, the more... Have you ever had someone just say one word, and you guys look at each other? And then the other person's like, hey, what happened? What did I say? Right? And the two of you are like, no, this is an inside joke we have, kind of thing, right? Frames of reference. You just get it. So, subhanAllah. That's kind of how it is. We have a very interesting culture of things going viral. And as a result, if things go viral, a lot of people see them, and then there's common frames of reference. So that's why you used to have vines, and now you have memes, which are common frames of reference. You could just say the word apparently, and everyone gets it. No? Y'all get it, yeah. So you could just say one word, and everybody gets it. Right? Frames of reference, do you get that? Okay, on that topic, the author, he has a little diagram here. How you have A and their field of experience, their behaviors, their encoding, their decoding, and then B's field of experience. And in the middle, there has to be what? Communication. And the amount of overlap you have, the more effective and easy communication is, and the more clear it is. And so the goal becomes create as much overlap as possible to ensure that both people understand each other. Okay, so the author goes on and says, my first advice for becoming a better listener is for you to focus on 3 aspects of communication when you're trying to get close to someone. Breadth, depth, and frequency. Breadth would be what? What's the variety of topics that you talk about with someone? When you're not close to somebody, what do you talk about? The weather, right? Really generic things. How's the weather? Right, the author's going to talk about levels of disclosure. Similar idea. The levels of disclosure. Superficial disclosure is what? You talk about gas prices. You know what I'm saying? You're standing in line at the grocery store, and you just hold up the grapes, and can you believe it? $4 for these, right? And there's this common like, yeah, man, like inflation, things going up. These common topics that, that everyone kind of is pretty generic about. But if you want to get close to somebody, you start talking about many different things. Many different things. Even certain things that you won't talk to other people about. And just reflect on your relationships and how much or how many different topics you'll talk about with different people. The closer you are, the more variety of topics you'll talk about. Even things that can be like triggering for other people, you can actually talk about with people really close to you. And so, breadth, learning to talk about a variety of topics. Depth. Those topics as well, you don't just give like superficial comments about them. You might even feel comfortable giving like a hot take. Like, hey, this is controversial, but I'll say it to you because I feel comfortable and safe with you. Right? And then frequency. How often do you talk? The author notes something really interesting. I want to get your opinion on this. What do you guys think? Show of hands. The author says, when you have a really, really, really close relationship, like established, where you just it's almost like a bond that's just not going to go away now. You're just connected. He says it's no longer as important to speak in quantity as it is in quality. A new friendship, you probably got to talk like many times to build familiarity. Once that's established and solid, all you need is from time to time one solid conversation and things are good. How many of y'all would agree with that? Yeah, I feel the same way, right? So initially though, when you're trying to get close to somebody, it's going to take many, many conversations. And you'll talk about different topics. And as you're talking, you're realizing, we have a lot of overlap. Which means it seems like our conversations and our relationship can be quite smooth and stable. Because imagine you meet somebody and every time you bring up a topic, you're fighting. You're disagreeing. You might not be tempted to be close to them. Because you don't want to end up in every conversation having an argument. Right? You can't even confide in them when you're going through something difficult. Because you call them and you're like, this is really rough. Like, I disagree. You're like, dude, that's not what I need right now, right? So we want similarity, naturally. Now, look, we can't have intimate conversations with everyone we meet. So that's also something to learn. Is disclosure at a healthy pace. Y'all ever met somebody who goes 0 to 100 in like 2 conversations? Huh? Any of y'all seen that? Interacted and you kind of went, whoa, that's meant to be for 2 months from now. Like, you mashallah, second meeting, you're just dumping it all. So we can't have intimate conversations with everybody. But we also can't live without some intimate relationships in which we feel comfortable revealing our deepest concerns and fears. These 3 aspects of dialogue can also be applied to our relationship with God, with Allah. Our communication with Allah should be frequent, deep, and broad. What does that look like? Frequent would be what? In your dua, in your communication, in your inner dialogue with God. What does that look like? Frequency. Like all the time. Not just after a prayer, but like, it's just a thought that crosses your mind. Ya Allah. You're walking to the exam hall and you're like, Ya Allah, help me. Right? Just inner conversations. You're feeling really upset. You're like, Ya Allah, like I'm really not doing well. Please uplift my heart. Constantly turning to Him. Think about text messages. The people that you text message so frequently are probably people that you're really close to, isn't it? The people that you're really close to. And here's another question. Do you text them all the time because you're close, or are you close because you text them all the time? Which way does the causality run? What do y'all think? Or did it? I think it started one way and then started going the other way. Yeah, go ahead.
It depends on the relationship.
That's the most politically correct answer ever, mashallah. It depends. Well, it does depend. It's true. Anyone have anything else they want to share there? Yeah?
Like it starts off as you wanting to be close to the person, so you text them often.
Right.
It becomes you're close to that person because you text them so often.
So it starts off, you develop closeness through frequent texting, and after that, the frequent texting is because you're close to them now. You've established that closeness. And that's what I meant. Yeah, like I agree with that point. I think causality runs one way the first time, and then after that, it goes the other way. Right? So yeah, with Allah Ta'ala, I don't feel close to God. Talk to Him more. And then you'll feel close to Him. And then when you feel close, that will lead you to talk more as well. Do you get what I'm saying? What about depth? What would depth look like? Revealing your most private and intimate concerns to God. Even things, the author goes on to say, even things that you can tell no human. Because sometimes in life there's just certain things you just don't feel comfortable telling anybody. Those are things you share with Allah. What about broad? What would that look like? You don't just talk about big situations. You might even just talk about small things. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he said, ask from Allah for anything you need, even if it's like a shoelace. Communicate with God. Right? Isn't that what we do with like people we're close to? We don't just tell them when we're getting married. Right? When we're close to people, we tell them about what? How the barista messed up your name. Right? Like, can you believe this? Because that's the, right, earth-shattering news you got to share. No, it's just connection. Isn't it? It's just connection. You just share, like, you're driving, you see a sign, you just take a picture. Hey, check out the sign. You post it in the group chat. It's just investments in these relationships. What about with God? So the author goes on to say, and this will be the last point for today. When attempting to build a deeper relationship with someone, it's important to risk going deeper and revealing something personal. Isn't it? Isn't that how you foster closer relationships? Is when you get people to share because you share? You know what I'm saying? You realize that you're just floating on the surface of the convo. So someone takes a risk and goes, let me share something private, a little personal. Hopefully not too personal, but a little personal. You maybe talk about your family a little bit. And then the other person's like, oh, okay, we're at that level. I'll share about my family. And then you're both like, oh, we're good. We're at a decent depth here. And he keeps moving. This signals to the other person that you trust them. And that trust should be reciprocated. The depth and frequency of self-disclosure between two people is the easiest way to determine whether a relationship is growing stronger, weaker, or is at a standstill. Reflect on that, guys. Reflect on that in your relationships with the people around you. How much self-disclosure is there? And how comfortable are people with that? And how much do they disclose to you? And that'll tell you something about the health of that relationship. Right? So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us tawfiq. May He grant us the ability to become better listeners, to become people who realize the importance of investing in our relationships through healthy communication with frequency, depth, and breadth. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.